Hi guys, my wonderful voice to say and introduce Gianpietro Fabre. Gianpietro comes from the game industry and then he moves to the cinema industry, and tonight he will show his projects and some pipelines or example of production, composition and lighting. So have a good fun and thanks.
Okay, let's start. Before we start, I'm gonna confess something. I am slightly sick, so I might start coughing and run for my life in the middle of the lecture. I hope I won't do that. So, a little bit of introduction of myself. I started making video games at university more than a decade ago. It was for fun, and I didn't think that it was going to be my career, my future, until I got a chance to move from Firenze to Milano to work on a company that I thought it was going to be the best company in the world, which was Milestone. And everyone who's from Milano here knows Milestone. It's still the biggest and the most famous Italian video game company. So I lasted there for 5 years. A lot of things happened. I learned a lot of things because I changed from being an amateur and a young guy to a professional, at least in making video games. And then something completely unexpected happened. I had to go with my supervisor at the time and another colleague to New Zealand to work for Weather, out of the box, because Peter Jackson called my supervisor and said, I want you and your team to work on my new film. And we thought, okay, this is not happening. So, and then we realized that it was happening for real, so we did end up in New Zealand, and my supervisor was still there. I've been there for 5 years. I worked on this incredible movie that never saw the light. So for 3 years, I worked on this show that I can't tell you what it is. I can't tell you anything about it, but after 3 years, we put it on hold, and we start to work on something else. So I worked in Tintin, I worked on Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, which is rubbish, the Hobbit trilogy, and then I moved to London, where I started to jump around companies. So I worked for MPC for a while, then I moved to Double Negative for a while, and then I moved to MPC for a little while again, and then I recently moved to Framestore at the beginning of the year. So why I'm here talking about movies when this is about game making? Because there is a connection between making movies and making games that is very important. I mean, the media, the technology, the tools are the same. The only difference is in a video game, you are the protagonist and the director. In a movie, you are not. In the video games, you are actively working towards the goal of the game. And you're taking part of it, you're making choices. This morning we were listening to the talk of Rick Gush, who was talking about you making choices, and that makes it fun, and it makes it real for you. In the movies, you're just watching something passively, and you want to be entertained. So this is a difference, but how do we create and we craft this called seven art is still very interesting. So the roles are quite similar. I'll show you the difference. Oh, sorry. This is the reel that I wanted to show.
My heart shattered apart with your sanity. Fabre.
Of course I did all of this myself. So everything is kind of similar to a video game. You start making environments from very simple geometry like you would do in video games. It's just pretty much as boring as it is when you model in clay for video games. So this is like Doctor Strange emergency room before they even start fighting it. So this is just layout, environment, and modeling department of working together to build up this thing. And then this is what I do for a living, which is creating the characters and props. So this is the hero character of Doctor Strange, who is, in this case, used with a costume for the fight in the emergency room. It's not much different from a game. It's just a little bit more detail, of course. And we do have photographies taken on set and plenty of more tools, but I mean, we are still talking about the same thing. And this is the first pass of what happened in shot. So this is already, it's changing. If you look at the bottom left, you see ER, emergency room, 100, 1260, blah, blah, blah. This is the name of the sequence and the name of the shot. So there's like this specific one. And there's a team of animators working on this. There might be mock-up stage, there might be not. And then there's an animator working on this. There's no clothing, there's no lighting, there's no rendering, there's nothing. It's just raw animation. And then it moves into a different department where they work on this effect that is going to be used because they are ethereal in an astral form, so they are not really there. And then it's moving on to a proper cloth simulation and all the fixes that this requires, because the clothes tend to compenetrate with skin and tend to fly in places where they're not supposed to fly, and things are supposed to happen in a way they usually break. So there's a pass of people fixing frame by frame different things. It's all based on the same characters, the same animation, and the same environment that we built before. And then this is starting to get a little bit closer to the final, so there's like lighting, and it's adding more and more realism, and then this is the final shot at the end. So instead of happening 60 times per second, the rendering usually takes 12 hours maybe for this shot. This is, you can check the amount of frames. It's around 120 frames. And it's probably 12 hours rendering. So it is a similar process, but it's just with more detail and more work into it. And usually the teams that are working on this are bigger than for video games. But for the people who are working into this, who are putting their effort and their sweat into this, it's no different than making a video game. I mean, I felt that changing from video games to films, it didn't, in the daily life, didn't change. I still go to work, I still have challenges, I still enjoy what I do, and I still try to do the best I can within the boundaries I have. Unfortunately, the people who are making decisions, the director, the script writer, the studios, are very far away. We do have very little in terms of decisional and creativity. It is the same in video games nowadays. Before, you could do your own video game, or with a little team, you could do your own stuff, and nowadays you can't, unless you want to shoot your own indie movie. In that case, you can. But if you want to make this, and unfortunately this is what the big studios are paying for, so Fox, Paramount, Universal, Disney, etc., they pay for this, and they are the client, they want to decide what they like, or they don't like, or they don't even know if they like or not, up to the very last second. So, talking about the most simple thing that I said before, in movies you are not able to set the camera yourself or set the light yourself. You are just being entertained. And the person who is deciding camera and lighting and what's going on screen is telling you a story that goes beyond a person talking to you and telling you stuff. It's hidden in details, and that makes a lot of difference. That makes a massive difference between an average movie to a great movie. And most of the great directors have a lot of tricks in their head to tell you a story without even letting you know that they're telling you something. You might notice one or two details, and they put maybe dozens in it. So let's see some very basic. I mean, this is like super basic stuff. In terms of sky, you can define mood with sky. You can decide that you want to have a dramatic, cloudy, stormy sky for certain reasons. You can have just a romantic sunset, or you can have a bright sky. And I don't have even an environment or a character. I have nothing. And you can decide that you want to put different kind of like fog, haze, and mist to create drama or a heavenly-like environment, or something tricky and quirky, and you're not exactly sure what's on the other side of the bridge. And the environment's very basic. And if you have something more interesting in terms of environment, you can play with light even more. So no matter if it's an antique or modern or a futuristic design, you can find a way, if you have a good director of photography, to create drama or to draw attention to different parts of the architecture itself. And here, we don't have characters, so nothing's happening. These are photos. When you start putting characters in your frames, you start to notice that you can do much more than you think with that. You can create focus with colors and with lights, or directing the eye of the person who's watching your film, or adding contrast. I mean, for example, Alien they made movies after movies after movie after movie before it turned into horrible stuff. But I'm talking about the first three at least, where you don't really see the alien ever. You see the silhouette of the alien. You don't really see how it is. But that makes his fortune. I mean, in the first one, it was a guy in a rubber suit who was like in front of the camera. It worked because it was moving strangely in the dark, and you could just get a silhouette of it. But you can do the opposite with a silhouette. You can create some sort of like a enlightenment effect, or you can just go with crazy colors like the bunny shot from Blade Runner, where you have blue and red, and that's something that when it happened in 1980, I think, Blade Runner, it defined the color palette for the entire sci-fi films. I mean, it changed drastically the way that we're using lights and colors in such movies. Before it was less. I mean, I didn't watch the sequel, already watching the original one after 40 years or 37 years, it's incredible how visionary it was so long ago when other movies of that era were, yes, they were good, but they were not even close to that good. It's something like a stone or a milestone into making films. And even if you don't have colors, you can just, I mean, imagine all the talented directors and films happen in black and white, where you can create incredible mood just using shadows. In terms of framing, you can tell also a lot in terms of story. So this is one of the most basic things, considering the fact that the screen of a film it has a defined perspective. So it's 16 by 9, and you can have wider screens for different movies nowadays. Directors go crazy and then film in 70 mil, which is like IMAX, crazy. But you do have a balance on the screens that help leading the eyes towards from one place to another and give the person who is watching that shot to understand what's happening on screen. If you have a very quick pace edit, like for example Mad Max, the newest one, where they run like crazy for 2 hours, the edit is so quick that you don't have time to read James Bond eye, read the gun out of shape, or look at Robert De Niro's face, look at the hand, look at the hand that is gun-shaped and the blood, etc., etc., etc. So everything is on screen, is center on screen. So every frame, the main actors is on screen, everything happens in the middle of the screen, because the first thing you look is in the middle of the screen. So if you don't have time to show anything else, there's where you watch. But in this case, if you want to have a little bit of more breathing and tell a story, then you start doing this kind of work. And it works with everything, characters, objects, panoramas. I mean, in this case, like in Inception, that they're walking, so you do have a pan of the camera where you see mid-ground, foreground, and the background with all the computer-generated skyscrapers. Or this is Seven from Fincher, and Fincher has a crazy mania for details. So when he shows you something like that frame, it's very important. And of course, this is a still, is not a real dolly with a camera. But if you watch Fincher film, you should really notice when it goes really close to an object, you realize that that's going to have a meaning or a purpose in the film. So in this case, this is I think is the weight of the stomach of the guy who died because of greed, the first victim. Or you can do, for example, in this case here, for Oblivion, it's like, Oblivion is kind of like a weird movie, but it has incredibly good composition, and it's telling you pretty much what's happening of this is like the super evil brain that is like orbiting around Earth, and the movement is telling you a little bit of what's happening. Of course, in the still frame, it doesn't. Or a spot at the end of Trainspotting getting his money. This is just for fun. One even more complex thing, and this works more for stills, is the golden ratio. Golden ratio is something that leads the eye from the outside of the image to a center of the image, which is usually, if you apply the rule of thirds here, it will apply as well. But in this case, you do have something that gives you a movement at the end inside a still. It's very hard to obtain. This is a professional photographer, and of course, it's complicated. But just to add it to the plate, and also when I'm talking about telling a story, you do have ways, of course, with camera movements, but also in stills, of leading the eye of the person who's watching your screen. So you can do it with creating focus or define areas of interest for the eye. Most of the directors do this a lot. It comes to the point where sometimes some certain movies have some kind of like a money shot where it becomes obvious. So like 2001 Space Odyssey, this is very obvious, and you have, every time that one of the astronauts go through the spaceship is very old concept, but it's very interesting concept because it has an incredible eye and taste for being shot on film, so it works great on film, and it has been thought to be looking great on film. Other things that are interesting are the points of interest. You can definitely tell what's happening in here by looking at the frame. So Indiana Jones and Lost Ark is like that moment where he has to replace the idol with the sachet with the sand, and he's looking there and he's like, am I going to do it? I'm not going to do it. Am I going to do it? And it's really cool because you have this camera here, and it tells you exactly what's happening, and you don't, even if you didn't watch the movie, you kind of know what his intentions are. And same thing for Gravity here, where she is almost at the end of the show, and she destroyed pretty much all the space equipment that mankind ever built, and she's like in the last module of the International Space Station, and she's looking at Earth, and you have this kind of like a change of camera between her in the inside to her reflection, and then to the eye, which has that horrendous cyclone, but is actually more homey and familiar than anything you see so far. Or other things about camera and angle, that's the beginning of Star Wars. The beginning of Star Wars is a masterpiece. You see a small ship being chased small ship coming from above, which is chased by a bigger ship coming from above. You see a small ship coming from below and chased by a bigger ship coming from above, which is telling you rebels chased by the Empire, and that's pretty much the whole Star Wars explained in one shot, which is the first shot. Or same about 7 details, so you frame to very close details. Or the bottom one is the girl with the dragon tattoo is another Fincher films, where if you didn't see it, there's like this guy that now you see from above, and it look, of course, dead or fainted. It's always shot from below, from this height, this point of view. So it looks huge, and it's a huge guy. And he's super mean for the first 20, 30 minutes of the movie. And this is the karma moment where you Lisbeth Salander finally strikes back, and it tases him, and he faints. And the camera that is used is this one here. It's tiny little, like an ant, and you can see him from above, and it looked like pretty small. And it's the opposite of Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry is always shot from here, looking at you and pointing the gun at you. So you are the guy who is laying down and is making his day. Other things that happens are, for example, when people falls or people travels on screen. This is, for example, Oblivion is Tom Cruise, who's the good guy, falling. And you don't see where he's falling, so you're worried as much as he is, because you don't know what's happening. And this is the end of Die Hard, where the villain is falling. So he doesn't know that he's falling, or he knows he's falling, and he doesn't know where he's going, but you do. So you know what is happening, you know what is going to happen to him, and he doesn't, and that makes you in a position of power, and you're looking at him from above, same as before. So you are in a position of power, he's in a position of weakness. Also, another thing is that, have you noticed when people driving the car or driving a motorcycle, it's placed in one of the 2/3 of the screen. If they're placed on the far third, you can see an empty space in front of them. So it's kind of like it looks like they know what they're doing. If they're going like crazy, usually they are shot from either from the front, or the car is almost at the end of the screen, so you don't know where they're going, and you are as worried as they are. So in this case here is like Lisbeth Salander driving on a motorcycle. There's a pan of the cam, and she is always in that side of the screen. She never passes it, and that's another clever way. Also, this here is the classic 300, and you never see the end of the pit. You just know that he's going to be kicked and he's going to fall into that pit. What's at the end of the pit? You don't know. It's scarier to not know what's at the end of the pit than see what's at the end of the pit. It might be 3 meters deep, it might be bottomless. If you don't know, it's more interesting than if you do know. Other things that you can play around with, symmetry, for example. Moonrise Kingdom or Grand Budapest Hotel are amazing type of movie, and Anderson is a great director who has developed his own unique way of directing, that it feels a little bit like a play mixed to a toy house. It's something that it's definitely stands out compared to everyone else, and it's really worth checking any of his movies to realize how well crafted every shot is. It's unbelievably well done, and you get so much more detail, so much more of the story if you follow all the details that he put in every screen. Or you can also get like a more simple opposite characters. So the good cop and the bad replicant at the beginning of Blade Runner, Tyler Durden, and oh my God, I forgot. Edward Norton anyway in Fight Club. This is the first time that you see also Edward Norton fighting against an imaginary opponent. So this is the moment where they look at each other and Tyler Durden sparkle the fact that it might not be there. Other tricks that you can do, other things that are very interesting to put into a frame is like create framing within your frame. So at a certain point your frame disappears, and it's good to frame something that is important. And you can do it in a lot of different ways. In this case, Taxi Driver frames on one eye, and this is to focus on something. In The Graduate, which is it's a very old movie from the 70s, or actually 60s, I think 67, 68, with a very young Dustin Hoffman being seduced by the mother of the girlfriend that he likes. And he's trying to walk away from her bedroom while she's getting undressed. And the way that she's blocking his way out is shot in this way. So you have the leg of her removing her stocking, and he has nowhere to go, and he's completely surrounded by her leg, and that's pretty much, it's constricted on screen. Or you can get this one here. This is the shot before the one that she's looking outside, looking at Earth, and this is kind of like a womb. It's kind of like every crazy stuff happened in the last 1 hour and a half in Gravity, and she is giving up, and she's kind of like, I just want to go home. And it's like this shot where she's kind of like a baby in a womb, and round, I don't know what it is, let's say spaceship interior, helps to sell the idea. Or also this one here from Social Network, so it's another Fincher movie. I'm fanatic with Fincher. It shows the main character from behind, so you don't see what he's saying. He's surrounded by the CEO, the executive of this company, and it has to pretty much apologize or give a speech to defend himself for stealing his former classmates' ideas. And you see how kind of like terrifying the thing is, because he is looking at everyone, and you don't look at him. You have no one to sympathize with. You are surrounded by people looking at you. This is a 3D, actually, framing, where you have mid-ground, where the characters are, and the point of interest is. And then you have a foreground and background that sell the fact that your characters are in an environment. This is used a lot in visual effects, because when you slap something on screen, and it's in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't give you a sense of space, a sense of dimension, a sense of scale, a sense of anything. If you put it into an environment with objects that reminds you of something that you know about, then you will instantly understand what's happening in there. So, I mean, in this case, 3 examples out of 4 are, 3 examples out of 4 are characters in environments. But for example, how are you going to understand how big is a T-Rex? Yes, of course, he's walking around and the soil, the ground is shaking when he's walking around. But now in this shot is not the greatest, but it's plenty of shots where the T-Rex is shot against something that defines a scale. It might be a tree, it might be a car, it might be a building, and you always understand the size because of that. If you put it in a grass field forever, you don't know how big it is, especially on screen. Hello? Go? Okay. Last things when you start playing around with colors, this is we're going towards the end. So these are most of them are iconic shots from movies that made a stand for the photography or the story that they built. So this it's iconic shot from American Beauty of the blonde girl in a dream of oh my god, I forgot the name. Anyway, or Amélie, which is all green and red. Green and red are complementary colors. So it gives you a sense of diametral opposition of what she is compared to the environment, and it's always interesting to see that how she stands out compared to the environment. It's a very clever way of making her different. So everything is kind of like in the same bottle green color all the time, and she's always red. She's always different. She's always standing out a little bit, no matter where she is. Another 2 examples here are the Chinese movies. Ang Lee and Zhang Yimou at their best. This was the time where China conquered a little bit of the West, and again with movies that were standing out for their story, but also their photography and the way that they were telling you and depicting the story itself. So Hero has this kind of different chapters, and every chapter has a different color pattern. So there's like the yellow part in the desert, the blue part, which is this one, the green one in the forest, etc. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is La Tigre del Dragone, is less clever, but it's still bringing this peculiar way of acting, peculiar way of moving the camera, where they are running through the roofs and running on these bamboo trees like they have no weight. And then in this movie, it's still very cool, and then you see the CG characters doing it, and it feels like a video game. But they are real actors with wires that are digitally removed. But it works because they're real characters, and it feels more realistic than it feels when you're watching, I don't know, the party of the dwarves in Goblin Cave, for example, in The Hobbit. It feels a video game. They have like this pan where they're running, jumping between rocks. It's very, very fake. Other things that you can do are setting an environment, setting a background that will define your mood and your character. So you can have a silhouette, and that's all you need, and then the rest is going to be done by the background. So, for example, the classic shot of E.T. of the kids going on a bicycle and E.T. lifting them, and you have this beautiful shot of the full moon with the kids passing through it. You really don't need much. I mean, of course, nowadays it feels kind of obvious that everyone could have that idea, but at that time, no one did, and it was like, wow, it's so good that I wanted to do it. I wanted to be the guy who did the idea, who had the idea. Or the Kaiser Soze story when he murders all the Bulgarian that kidnap his wife and his daughter. And it's like, at the end of the story, he's walking away from his house on fire. You don't see him, and he doesn't look at the burning house. He's just looking away and walking away. And that's where all the cool guys that don't look at explosions come from. I mean, every time that there is an explosion and the cool guys walking away without looking, that's where it comes from. Or the classic Empire Strikes Back duel, where you do have warm steps, blue smokes, two lightsabers, one blue, one red. You know who's the good guy, you know who's the bad guy. You just look at what are the lightsabers. You don't need to see the characters. You just know what happens from there. Before the green, purple, crazy Jedi of the second trilogy. No, never mind. Oh, that was the last one. So, so all this, let's say, bullshit about framing, et cetera, is just because working on video games, you have the ability of moving your camera and be your own director. So you have the ability of doing it. You're not constricted by that. You just get the basics of how much you can tell from a still image. If you can move the camera and be the protagonist and make choices, you have much more power. I wanted to play, for example, Last of Us, which is a video game about this guy who is helping this girl to go from A to B in a world infested with zombies, or pretty much sort of zombies. I wanted to play this game for years and years and years and years. I didn't have a console. I'm not working for video games anymore. I was feeling a little bit like, meh. I didn't in the end. I watched a video, 6 hours long, of someone playing the game, and I was watching the video. It was so entertaining because the game is so good that even if you're just looking at a guy running, the cutscenes and everything was seamlessly made in a 6 hours long movie where the characters were so good, so believable, and so emotionally connected that I couldn't stop watching it. It was like an amazing experience. I mean, I wish I could play it. I didn't. I watched the movie of it, and it was great. So in the future, where we're going to have more and more small video games where you can play for 30 seconds on your commute, we still need bigger stories. And the boundary between movies and games is getting more and more thin. There might be a moment where games will look like movies will be real time, who knows. 3D cameras will allow you to walk a different part of the screen. Future is beautiful. Thank you, guys. If you want to have some questions, I will stop talking, because otherwise I can continue forever. Otherwise, we can go for dinner. It's perfect. Speechless. Yeah. I didn't even cough. I almost coughed one time. Okay. So if you want to get in touch with me, talk about anything you want, from your hairstyle to the shoes you bought to visual effects, you can write me an email. Otherwise, I will be here tomorrow and Sunday, walking around, lurking in the shadows. I'm Italian, so I can speak a little Italian. It doesn't seem, but I do. So good luck with your project, which is really demanding. And let's go for dinner.
So now, thanks to Gianpietro. For me, it's a very pleasure to have him here after 10 years. And you were not so good in English and in visual effects when I met you. So I have in my mind, there is something strange, because you teach me how to light video games. And when you went out of my life, I started making the same processes. So I think that tonight you put some fundamentals and some seeds that are very good seeds, and I can say that. So thanks, Gianpietro, and go to eat on the upstairs and take your bags and have a good time. Thanks, everybody.